PC gamers just cannot catch a break in 2023. It doesn't matter whether you have a beefy RTX 4090 or a tiny 1660 or 1650, this year has given PC gamers more and more disappointments. After all, it doesn't matter how great a game is if you cannot even get it to run at a stable frame rate. Blame it on the VRAM issues, new game engines, or whatever the hell you want, but in my opinion, it comes down to one thing: the lack of fucks given when it comes to optimization. And that brings us to Immortals of Aveum. I had a whole different intro planned where I was going to talk about how Carl from Shameless is all grown up. He discovered he had RGB magic and now was being trained by Zoe Washburn from Firefly. But now it was ruined because as soon as I got into the game, this is what I saw. Riveting performance, isn't it? Of course, I figured that my settings were too high, so I set my resolution at 1080p, lowered the settings to the minimum, and turned DLSS to balanced. You'd think that would fix it, right?
Fake news. It's fake. Phony. Fake.
Even at the lowest settings, I barely maintained 60 FPS, and there were dips and stutters all the way down to 30-35 FPS. The only way to keep the frame rate from dipping below 60 FPS was to have DLSS on ultra performance, and you can see what that does to image quality. In the interest of full disclosure, my PC has a Ryzen 5800X3D, 16 gigs of RAM, and an RTX 2070 Super. And hold on, I know what you're thinking. It's your fault. You're playing a game that requires a 2080 Super to run at 1080p 60 FPS at low settings. Here's what I want to say to you.
Who put you on the planet?
The RTX 2080 Super being the lowest requirement for this game is a big red flag. Because when I go to the latest Steam hardware survey, do you know what the most common GPU is? The GTX 1650, followed by an RTX 3060, which is around 20% slower than a 2080 Super. And here's the biggest implication of that. Going by the Steam hardware results, around 53% of PC gamers cannot even expect to run this game at 60 FPS even at the lowest settings unless they're playing at 720p maybe.
See, now that's some bullshit.
I've always said, 60 FPS can make a good game better, but it will never make a bad game good. I mean, let's face it, even if Redfall ran at 120 FPS, it'd still be a terrible game. And the problem with Immortals of Aveum is that the game itself isn't really all that great. The premise is alright, the cinematics look really good. You have three kinds of magic: blue, which is like shooting a long-range rifle; red is short distance, high burst damage like a shotgun; and green is like an SMG or an assault rifle depending on how you look at it. And it has some pretty cool stuff like the animate ability, which allows you to move inanimate objects in order to explore and solve puzzles. Combat encounters can be intense with the enemies crowding you and requiring you to use different abilities, which in turn requires some quick thinking and maneuvering to come out on top. There is some promise in this game. If the game didn't perform so bad, or rather if the requirements weren't so ridiculously high, it'd be a 7 out of 10 game for me, maybe even 8 or 9 out of 10 for somebody else. But it doesn't even matter, at least as far as I'm concerned. The game uses a GPU and CPU budgeting feature from Unreal Engine 5, but I have absolutely no clue what it means because it doesn't really translate to any real-world terms in the game menu. The game also touts a multitude of Unreal Engine 5 features like Nanite and Lumen, but what the hell is even the point if half the people don't even get to see it? I don't even see the point of blaming the engine because Jedi Survivor was on Unreal Engine 4 and still had terrible performance issues. The way I see it with the state of AAA games on PC this year, publishers either no longer think that game optimization is important, or they expect advancements like DLSS or FSR to just brute force their way through their own lack of focus. I did speak to a friend who's playing the game on the PS5 and he told me that he's getting smooth performance and the game looks sharp, so at least that's a saving grace. In the end, I can't say much about the console performance myself, but if you're on PC, at least a modest one, I suggest you give the same amount of fucks about this game as EA gives about 50% of PC gamers.
Zero!
Wait for it to get some performance fixes and some better optimization and get it on a deep discount, or just maybe don't get it at all because there are plenty of games coming out this year to keep you busy anyway.